Okay. If you know the answer to this, please don't give it away. How much do pirates pay to pierce their ears? The Buccaneer. Actually, it's about. Okay, so let's open up to the Engage of chapter 9. We're on page 67 in your little atheist book. So the first question says this, how would you refute the objection that the New Testament isn't reliable because history can't be known? Oh yeah, just 5 to 7. It's just 5 to 7. I thought that sounded familiar. Okay, number 5. What would you say to a skeptic who says to you, I don't believe the New Testament because the documents are not early enough?
They're still written by eyewitnesses.
They're still written by eyewitnesses, so how much earlier can they be? Before it happened? Yes.
Like, historians still write accurately about especially for like emotional times.
70s are my jam, man. That's when I was your age, right? So I remember that. Yeah.
Majority of people back then were illiterate, so they didn't have the knowledge or easy access as we do today.
Right. To writings and those sorts of things. And the fact that they wrote it down tells us something, right? It wasn't passed down orally. It was important enough for them to write it down and then just send it out to places. Anything else about that? So here's some things that I wrote down. It's too early to be legend, and there were too many. If there were falsities in it, there were too many eyewitnesses around that could correct that. And then I love this example on page 245. And this might come from a little bit of the story. So yeah. So I'm on page 145. It's talking about how as long as there are eyewitnesses still living, then you can't deny what happened. You can't, but it doesn't make sense, especially if the eyewitnesses are honest. And so it says on 245, we're seeing this tendency right now with regard to the Holocaust. In the early 21st century, we've begun to see more people claim that the Holocaust never happened. Why are the revisionists trying this now? Because most of the eyewitnesses have now died. Probably at this point. Fortunately, since we have written eyewitness testimony from the Holocaust, the revisionists are not successful in passing off their lies as truth. The same holds true for the New Testament. If the New Testament was written within 60 years of the events it records, it is highly unlikely that these events could be legendary. And as we have seen, all of the New Testament documents were written within 60 years of the events of many, and many much earlier. I wasn't an eyewitness to the Holocaust, but others were. And among those others were my parents' closest friends. He was a Dutch general. He was on the NATO military committee with my father. And they were both from wealthy families. And so they were both taken by the Nazis. They overran the Dutch, Holland, the Netherlands. So right name, and they were separately because they were young children taken to camps, not the death camps, but concentration camps, and they both lived through their parents. And so I am just one generation away from those who remember it all. And that to me, that is enough evidence to say that yes, those death camps, those concentration camps existed. But people with ulterior motives say otherwise. And that's what is going on. People with ulterior ideas are saying that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, or the New Testament isn't early. They're making a higher bar than necessary, when a higher bar than they would for any other engine, because they don't want to.
People are trying to say that the Holocaust never happened. How do they explain the thousands of people that just all of a sudden died, and like the actual physical buildings and like land?
Well, and the Nazis filmed much of what they did because they were so proud of it. So we have ample evidence. The reason that people would say that the Holocaust didn't exist is because they have an agenda that they don't want that to be true. And the same thing is true with this.
It's just like super silly because like there's actual physical evidence, not just spoken.
Right. All right, it is. It's ridiculous. And then some other things that I put here was, so if we are to say, let's take the Holocaust as the example, if we are to say that we can't believe that because of how long ago it was, then we can't believe in any history from the last 15 to 40 years. And I can remember back more than 40 years, right? 50 years. Can we not believe in 9/11? Can we not believe that Reagan was president of the United States? Can we not believe that FDR was the president of the United States? Berlin Wall falling down? Never happened. Well, it was on TV.
But towers sustain.
Because I started to leave for FCA, and my sister called me and said, "Are you watching your TV?" And I said, "No, I got to go to FCA." She said, "You're not going to go yet. Turn on your TV." And they were dismantling. By the way, I have a piece of it. And I stood at that wall when I was a 10th grader. We can't believe any of that. The explosion of the Challenger. I remember that. I was in class when that happened. And it came on the intercom that the Challenger had exploded. And all the teachers got our TVs out and we all watched it on the TV. Not we didn't watch the actual explosion, but the news, because there was a teacher on board. And it was just such a disaster. It was a disaster. Yes.
So basically, we know for a fact that the New Testament came out
Huh? What was that last word?
Africa.
I'm not sure it's the right use of the word, but let me think about it. Okay.
Okay.
So we have sources that were their own memories, and they were the memories of eyewitnesses. When you tell someone something that happened to you, don't you expect them, and you're telling the truth, don't you expect them to believe you?
No.
You would hope so, right? You would hope so. And they were remembered, all of these things were remembered because of the emotional impact. The reason I can hear Dr. Payne's voice in my ear coming on the intercom saying the challenges and all of the reason I can hear that clearly is because it happened to me. It was an emotional thing, especially for teachers. Same with Columbine, 9/11, all of that. I got a call from my husband and said, turn on the TV. And I turned on the TV just before the first tower collapsed. And I had my children with me. And I took Katie upstairs. And Josh asked, and I turned it off because I was afraid Wayne was yeah, he was a little too. But yeah, that was and Josh asked if he could watch, and I took the kids upstairs and said, I'll let you watch, but it might be very disturbing. And I turned on the TV. And it's seared in my brain. My 63-year-old adult brain, it's seared into it because it was so. And that's true of many different things. So question 6. After answering the skeptic's previous question, how would you respond to one who persists by saying that the written testimony of the New Testament was still not as early as expected? Right. Right. Very few could actually read, although they did write it down. What else?
They thought that Jesus would come back in their lifetime, so they didn't see a need to write it down. But as they were getting older, they're like, maybe we should.
Yep. Hey, hence the 12, 20, 50 years. Yeah. He not come back yet. So maybe we ought to write this down. Yeah. And some were very early. Mark was very early, probably in the 40s. So you can remember 10 years ago, can't you? Yeah.
How old would I be? 7? Yeah.
So,
what age?
so as Macy said, most people were illiterate, so there wasn't much use for a written account. And then in that time, because it was an oral culture, people had really good abilities in memorization. They were an oral culture. So I'm going to read another quote on this. They could remember lots of things. I've told you that most Jewish males had the entire New Testament or the Old Testament committed to memory, memorized it, the whole thing. Can you imagine that? You thought John 1:1-18 was, yeah. That's yeah. And then I don't know where this is. Yeah, here it is. In an oral culture like the first century Palestine, the ability to memorize and retain large tracts of oral tradition was highly prized and a highly developed skill. From the earliest age, children in the home, elementary school, and the synagogue were taught to memorize faithfully sacred tradition. The disciples would have exercised similar care with the teachings of Jesus because they were so important to them. Some believe that Jesus would return in their lifetime. And then as they got older, they realized that maybe it would be longer. And then as the gospel spread throughout the known world, writing was the best form of communication because you couldn't go to every place, right, to get the gospel out, but you could send a letter to more places. Okay, question 7. How would you respond to a skeptic who asks if Jesus actually did rise from the dead? Shouldn't there be more written about him than there is?
There's actually a lot written about him in Christianity and out of Christianity, because after 150 years of his life compared to Tiberius, he has 43 authors, and Tiberius has only 10 authors.
So for a Jewish peasant and pastor come lately, or rabbi come lately, we don't know very much about most of those people outside of the Bible that were Jesus' contemporaries. And here we have more written about Jesus than any other figure that has ever. So it's not that there's not enough. We have more than we could expect for a man who was born into poverty, supposedly for himself. That's plenty of proof. We're gonna have to jettison a lot of people like Julius Caesar if we're gonna say there's not enough about Jesus. And nobody says that Caesar didn't exist, right? So okay, where else? We have more than expected and more than enough to establish beyond a reasonable doubt what happened. Jesus is referenced far more than other important people of his day, and we don't doubt their histories. And then Blomberg said this. First is the humble beginnings of Christianity as opposed to the Roman Empire, and the remote location of Palestine, and the small percentage of surviving manuscripts, and the lack of attention paid to Jewish history in those ancient writings that are the word is extant that survive, and how many people write books now, let alone in what we have, and we do have the names of ancient, largely. Okay, that last part. Scratch that last part. So it wouldn't have survived. It shouldn't have survived based on those facts. But it was not only survived. People carefully preserved. It had to have been important to them, really, really important to them for that to happen. And then page 240. Yeah, I'm not going to read that. I'll let you work on your on the